Hello, this is a quick talk at why we are wasting our time with speed enforcement. Now, I admit I'm a little bit like a road-obsessed toddler, always asking mummy why. I don't know enough to present value judgments here, but just to ask questions. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing that in the hope that I'm going to encourage debate and ultimately improve the safety of our roads, getting us to think more about speeding and the intelligent policing of speeding, hopefully for us all to make roads safer. But I'm also going to be looking at speeding where it really has the greatest effect on people, i.e. in built-up communities, in residential living spaces. So what's the scale of the problem with speeding? Well, it's bizarrely prevalent and obviously deadly. It's directly attributable to about 220 deaths a year, and thousands of serious injuries, as well as emotionally devastating families. Then there's the cost of emergency response, medical care, and all clearing up. We know that risk rises exponentially with speed. A greater speed gives far greater risk of death or injury. If we compare the efforts that are made to stop deaths with those that we put in to reduce knife crime, which kills a similar amount of people per year, or we compare speeding with the efforts that are made to tackle terrorism, which kills about 6 people per year in the UK. All tragic, but it's a fraction of the road deaths attributable to speeding. So are we getting the response correct here? And yet also most people speed. It's a social norm. In a 30 zone, depending on the topography, typically at about 36 miles per hour. Most people speed because most people speed. It's a dangerous weapon, but wielded in some sort of socially acceptable manner. Walk down the street with a bottle and you're off to a rather sophisticated dinner party. Walk down the street with a broken bottle and the police will very rapidly light you up with little red dots. A vehicle speeding somehow is strangely acceptable, however, so it doesn't really make sense. Most communities, and I mean residential estates, towns, villages, that sort of thing, care about speeding. It affects their safety, it affects their amenity. And they often raise it as one of their high-level concerns for policing. So much so that communities dedicate their own resources, their own time to run speedwatch groups to try and help the police reduce speeding. The communities care because it obviously affects them. But the police, it seems, don't. It's not generally seen as important enough in comparison with the gamut and the immediacy of all their other tasks. The normality of speeding has somehow affected them too. There may be occasional speed vans deployed, the sponsoring of community speedwatch yellow jackets and handheld guns, and some warm words that they will follow up the reports that the community speedwatch submit. But community speedwatch teams have learned to trust those assurances in the same way they trust the words, "Your call is important to us." So let's have a closer look at the police. Well, there are 41 police forces in the UK, each overseen by a publicly elected commissioner that sets the force objectives according to what their electorate tell them. And the commissioner also holds each force, their force, accountable to those objectives. At least that's how it's meant to work. Now, it may have changed since I was at school, but it wasn't the brightest, most dynamic, go-getting kids that were attracted to the police force. No, budding Bobby Truncheon wanted structure and command. He wanted to do what he was told and maybe enjoy a tinge of power over everyone else, but without going to the effort of needing a degree. We need to remember that the police have a command-based structure and military-like hierarchy. They are internally, and sometimes externally, authoritarian. It's a top-down structure based on rules and processes. And it probably should be. It's probably the best type of structure for an enforcement function. So I'm being a little bit unfair, of course, but it's not an organisational culture familiar to most of you watching this. Those of you from companies, for example. Those companies thrive on innovation, on invention, on improvement. Such companies thrive on being quick, responsive, dynamic and new. Invention and innovation are supported from the bottom up. Rock the boat, change the world. That's how you get on in those companies. It's completely different and opposite to the police culture. It's evident that we need to get top-down involvement from the police if we expect change at an operational level. And therein lies the rub. Because communities try things like reporting data from vehicle-activated signs and data loggers. And these stats show that they're effective for many drivers. Vehicle-activated signs work for those that have a moral compass. But it doesn't work for those that don't care. And they try things like community speedwatch schemes. Now, these schemes are where the frustrations of speeding compels the community to try and help. Although in reality, unfortunately, it becomes more of a police communities relation exercise than a truly effective one. Like some sort of tabloid agony aunt column, where dedication is high and the abuse tolerated, these schemes do work, but generally only while they're operating. When the yellow jackets are not there, it tends to return to normal. However, it's not the yellow jackets per se that are doing the work, it's the threat of being caught to the driver. It's the threat to the driver. This is why average speed check cameras work really well. Where the risk of being caught is high, it affects driver speeds. So when CS teams are operating, they work, and when they aren't, there's no risk of sanction. Unless CSW teams are out often and in regular times, then the schemes tend to become ineffective. After all, schemes have been running for nearly 2 decades now, and yet speeding still is prevalent. Well, why is that? It's because community speedwatch schemes are difficult to keep motivated and active. They require effort. They require coordination and ongoing action. And to do this, they need to be run by ex-captains of industry, very different people to those that they interface to in the police. So, after all that effort, they report into the lower levels of the police road safety teams, exactly those people that can't change process, can't react to circumstance or adapt, and yet we expect them to react. Unfortunately, the lack of action and the lack of feedback from the police is one of the key reasons why these schemes lose momentum and fail. And consequently, it also damages the police community relations that they were trying to build. So we've got to ask ourselves, are we being clever about this? Where we focus at the moment and what we do. Currently, we either fine with enforcement cameras or we report with community speedwatch schemes all vehicles over a fixed limit. And if you look at the volume curves of the traffic, the bulk of those reports will clearly be near the median, where the volumes are the highest. Masses of reports of people going over the limit, but not focusing on those causing the greatest risk. So, no wonder the police find it really hard to motivate themselves about 36 in a 30 zone. And in fact, we've already got evidence of the police speeding themselves when they're not blue lighting. They're slow and cumbersome to respond already, and they do only what their boss tells them to do, generally respond to the immediacy of day-to-day tasks and be economic. So it's too much to expect operational officers to try and respond to masses of reports of the bulk of speeding in the near the median. There's just no motivation to do that. And also, whilst speeding remains somewhat socially acceptable, it also alienates drivers against the police and the fines that are caused. They basically say things, they get caught at 37, 36 miles per hour, and they say, it's unfair, everyone speeds, and I was just over. So shouldn't we be asking ourselves if we're being clever about this, and how we should be more clever about tackling the deaths and the serious injuries caused by speeding? After all, the aim here is not to fine people but to change driver behaviour and focus enforcement where it saves the most lives. To make it socially unacceptable to speed in the same way that we did for drink driving or unbelted driving. Now, many of you won't remember the 70s and the 80s, but bizarrely, these things were once seen as okay, and yet now they're seen as totally stupid. So speeding needs to become as socially unacceptable as that, as socially unacceptable as Dennis Nielsen farting in a lift. We need to set a stronger expectation of the word limit in speed limit. It needs to be, it means increasing the risk of being caught speeding and changing social attitudes towards its acceptability. It means squeezing that graph so that it's much steeper on the right hand side and focusing enforcement on those that are being truly reckless with speed. Engineering social attitudes gradually without alienating those with a generally good moral compass. So by focusing on those offenders at the top end and working our way from right to left, we're focusing very limited police resources towards the safety risk where the safety risk is the highest. And indeed, many communities are now taking ownership of their own speeding problems. They're giving police much more detailed information and targeted information about which specific vehicles are causing the greatest risk, which vehicles are persistently speeding rather than making the occasional mistake. They're even telling the police which speeders are in untaxed and un-MOT'd vehicles. As an example of this, in the past year, from just 14 sites, the communities using AutoSpeedWatch have captured 95,000 speeding offences. But rather than ask the police to write 95,000 letters, the system has prioritised the worst offenders. For example, 7,500 offences of those 95,000 offences are from vehicles that have been caught 10 times or more. And that equates to just 238 vehicles. So it turns out that you can tackle the most persistent, worst 7,500 offences with just 238 police responses. Isn't that a better use of their limited time? Thank you.